Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Floyd. I am the crop insurance manager for Producer Ag Insurance, and just want to welcome everybody on today for our April edition of our weather series with meteorologist Brian Bledsoe. Brian's got a lot of information for us today um, in our current weather pattern and what to expect here over the next week to 10 days, and a lot of information moving forward. So, Brian, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I know you got a lot of ground to cover and a short time to do it here. So,
Yeah, definitely so. Thank you so much. And before we get down to some of the forecast information that I think you're going to find really useful, is just a couple of thoughts that I've been having really through this stretch of awful weather that a lot of us have been seeing, whether it's just been the persistent drought or the drought in combination of the freeze, or I know some folks have even had, had to deal with some hail, from the thunderstorms events that have been plaguing, some parts of East and Southeast Kansas. But I want you to think about this, and these are important to me because, in my mind, consumers of this information in terms of a long-range forecast need to beware of persistence bias. And persistence bias is basically the pattern is what it is, and it's not going to change because of how it's been. We all know that the weather pattern will change. It's just pinning down exactly when that most favorable part is going to come in to actually change it. Now, I will also say that creators of this content, namely myself, okay, also need to be aware of confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically seeking out any evidence to support my current thoughts or my past thoughts. That is a very dangerous way to go about forecasting because you kind of have to know when to keep on with a forecast or when to junk it or when to change it or whatever. And it's a very important dance that both the consumer and the creators actually do. So what I try to do in these videos is really lay out all of the evidence before me, the best evidence that I have to make the forecast and the decisions that I'm showing you. And I think probably one of the big negative impacts so far of this pattern from changing has just simply been the drought. Drought a lot of times begets drought if the pattern is not going to change. And there's a lot of evidence that I have to show you today that show why this pattern is going to change. So let's get down to those things right now. First of all, let's take a look at the short-term drought index, which has just been brutal, all right, not just across the western half of Kansas, but really all throughout most of the western high plains and the Intermountain West. We also have, and this shouldn't be slept on either, a significant drought that's going on across parts of the southeast. There's just been this narrow ribbon here, all right, eastern Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, central and even southwest Texas has done better, and then northeastern and the Midwest that have actually been okay. There's a lot of drought on the map right here. And if we weren't going to change things up from an ocean standpoint, namely this push toward El Nino, I would say we're in a whole heap of trouble and we're not going to get out of it anytime soon. But I think that there's some reason as to why we're going to start to make a dent in this. First of all, the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to break the 14-day period down in 7-day increments here. And this data came from last night. The newest stuff is still coming in and will be in during the middle part of the day. But this is the forecast temperature anomaly from this afternoon right through the 28th of April. And you can see that for the most part, we're largely still going to be warmer than average. Now, today and tomorrow are really, front loading the warmth with this pattern, in my opinion. So I want you to keep that in mind. But from a precipitation standpoint through the same time frame, look at this business that we've got going on here. Okay, we're actually starting to bring rain chances back farther west into north central and northwest Kansas, all of Nebraska, and a large part of the western Corn Belt. Now, southwest and south central, you're going to struggle. I'm just straight up with you. This type of pattern is not one that favors these areas down here in the brown, because what's going to happen is that low is going to come through right about like that. So anything north of that low up here is going to be the benefactor from that storm that comes through later this weekend and early next week. Now, if we look at the temperature trend from, say, the 28th through the 5th, all right, 28th of April through the 5th of May, that's a whole lot different. And that's because I've been saying a lot to my clients and those who consume this is that winter's not over for a lot of us. It has been brutally cold up across Alaska and Canada for the past several months. So as warm and windy as we've been down here, they've been just as cold and snowy up there, and it only takes a front or two. We saw one of those cold fronts come through, a few days ago when we dealt with those freeze conditions, especially across the western half of the state. But the temperature anomalies to wrap up April and to kick off May are going to be far from warm right now, and we're also going to see better rain chances for some areas that haven't had much of anything at all here recently. We're also seeing a ribbon of rain down here from East Texas to the southeast. So this next 14 days, in my opinion, are not going to be perfect for everybody. That's just not how this works when we start to change this stuff. Could these rainfall estimates be overdone because it's not factoring in how nasty the drought is? I suppose it's possible. And that's why I'm not putting specific rainfall amounts on here. I'm looking for the trend, because the trend has to start somewhere. And this storm system that's coming through, not only through the weekend, but we've got another one coming through during the course of next week, at least puts us in a better opportunity to score some rain. All right. So I think that's the most important part over the next couple of weeks. The current state of the oceans is also very important. This sea surface temperature anomaly animation starts from March 22nd and finishes yesterday. All right. So I want you to watch how these ocean temperatures are changing, especially here. Okay. Notice how they started out cool. All right. And you could see that cool water just basically goes away and is being replaced by warmer than average water right there. The other important thing to note is that while we have some coolish water up here in the Gulf of Alaska, this part of the ocean is not cool at all. It is a lot warmer than average across the west coast of North America, off the Baja. And we also have a cool kind of ribbon here. All right. And that's important too, because the oceans work together in facilitating our weather patterns. So a lot of times, if the North Atlantic is cool and this stretch of the ocean here in the West Pacific are warm, and we've got an El Nino coming on, the evidence is really overwhelming that we don't have a lot of drought to worry about as we go through this, that the worst may have already been behind us for a lot of us. And I'm not saying that's that way for everybody, as I'll show you, but the way the oceans are stacked right now, we have seen far worse setups, in my opinion, for the middle part of the country versus what we're seeing right now. And I bullseye these areas for a reason, because they're all four important. Obviously, the North Atlantic, as I'd mentioned, the ENSO region here, we've got sea surface temperatures here right off the west coast of South America that are 1.5 degrees Celsius above average. They're already into El Nino at that point. And the thing that's frustrating to me a little bit about, NOAA or the Climate Prediction Center is that they usually lag. All right. They usually lag behind with this type of transition. You don't have to be meeting their technical definition of El Nino to have El Nino-like impacts, because to me, as I've said for a long time, it's not necessarily when that El Nino gets established, it's that change that takes place from where we've been to where we are going that a lot of times kicks the pattern into high gear and can really be impactful. We also have the Indian Ocean over here, which is warmer than average. All of this stuff works together to keep the pattern going. And this is what it looks like beneath the surface. All right, so this top rectangle, all right, over here is Indonesia, and then over here is South America. That's what's going on right here at the surface. This is what's going on beneath the surface. All of this warmer than average water, and some of it is over 5 degrees Celsius above average, is trucking eastward across the Pacific, and it's also starting to surface. This is called a Kelvin wave. A lot of times when these Kelvin waves get into the eastern Pacific off the west coast of South America, that will trigger the pattern to change. And I think some of that is what we're seeing. This presentation is not going to stop, all right? It is very well established, and it's only going to become more pronounced and help this El Nino develop. So this subsurface warm pool, and in some cases record warm pool, is incredibly important for where we're going. The other bit of evidence that I want to show you here is a pressure pattern that's called the Southern Oscillation Index. It's the measure of pressure differences from Darwin, Australia to Tahiti. And whenever this Southern Oscillation Index is positive, up here above positive 10, we think La Nina, we think dryness, we think windy, we think warm, so on and so forth. But to start April, this thing crashed, and it crashed because of that warm pool that's migrating eastward across the Pacific. So we had this huge crash that took us down to almost a -10. That is a huge change over a short period, and we're staying down here. In fact, the average for the past 30 days is about -7.5. The previous average, all right, was way up here, all right, above +10. In fact, the March average was just the exact opposite of that. So this is another indication of the pattern likely helping to kick it into high gear and see some things that we might not have seen here for a while. The current Nino 3.4 index also shows that type of a change too. For all the way back in January, we were way down here at a -1. Right now, we were up here at a +0.5. That is a degree and a half, okay? A degree and a half Celsius change over that period of time. That is, again, a huge change for such a short period. And if you've been watching these for a long time, you know that I was really interested in the change that was going to take place from March 1st over here toward June. Because March 1st, we were technically still right there around weak La Nina conditions. And up here now, we're right there at the threshold of weak El Nino. Computer model information. This is from the Copernicus 3 model. This is looking at the sea surface temperature anomaly plume for that area that I just mentioned that goes all the way out through September. So what I want you to focus on again is how rapidly things are changing. I don't necessarily want you to focus on these real high ends or these real low ends. Focus on stuff in the middle. And the middle puts us right there to about 2 degrees Celsius above average by September. That would put us into strong El Nino territory, or if some people want to call it super El Nino, whatever you want to call it, but strong El Nino territory. I'm not so much concerned and worried about out here. I'm most concerned about what happens in this window of opportunity here, okay? Because how quickly we change and how strongly this El Nino comes on has, in my opinion, a bigger difference. The European model, singled out, does the same exact thing. Again, I want to focus on this front window, okay? You see how closely packed these lines are together? That indicates the model having great confidence in how this is going to transition. When you get out here, you see these lines shotgunned all over the place. But even the European model, the average of that takes us up here, you know, above 2 degrees Celsius above average. But I'm most concerned about this transition between now and June. The Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia, their model does the same thing. All right. By the time September gets here, it's got us up there at about 2.5 degrees Celsius above average. That puts it into a very strong El Nino. And there's a lot of media and a lot of attention out there that this El Nino could be the strongest El Nino event in the past 100+ years. I suppose that's possible. I think we just have to be very measured right now on the strength. The transition, I have no problem with, and I've said that for months, that this was going to be a rapid transition, and that's exactly how it's unfolding. But I think the strength we have to table at least a little bit. And while I think it's going to be a strong event, how strong that is, we have to at least watch closely as we go down the road. So when we look at some computer model information here, I want you to really focus on these trends. And we're going to start out with the temperature anomaly forecast from the Euro model, April to October. I know we're already almost through April, but I want you to see what it was forecasting for April to see how it initialized and how we're verifying. So this is what the temperature anomaly forecast was for April. And you could see coming down here through parts of northern Montana and into the Dakotas and Midwest, we had some coolness here going on. Everybody else pretty much warmer than average. But the interesting thing about this, you know, down here across parts of South and Southwest Texas, while it has been, you know, still somewhat warm, you see that little bit of a cool tendency coming here out of Mexico. Farther north, they've actually had some rain down here across parts of Southwest Texas, which is kind of an indicator that we have made that kind of transition toward this El Nino move. But if we look at May, all right, do you see that weakness here in the temperature profile? These models are pretty terrible at seeing colder than average temperatures. So anytime I see the gray here, which is technically, you know, right there at about a 0.5 degree above average to a 0.5 degree below average, to me, that indicates cooler than average or not hot. How about that? The eastern half of Kansas, a little bit warmer there. But if we go to June, you see that kind of average to cooler than average plume expand a little bit. and it envelops all of the western half of Kansas and even the eastern half of Kansas. No huge heat signal. That main heat signal is up here. Okay. July, same story. I think this area here, if there's going to be some heat build, it would be the southeast corner of Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, and down here through East Texas. Not only have the models kind of pinpointed that a little bit, but also historically, we kind of look at that too. But the western, really 2/3 of Kansas, not showing a huge heat signal there through July even. August, we bring that back a little bit. And I think for good reason, because as I've said, historically, East and Southeast Kansas, Eastern Oklahoma down here through East Texas, if we have a strong El Nino, there will be some heat that starts to show up here in August. September, nothing off the chain, but still a little bit warmer here. And if we go to October, I know this is a long ways out there, but most of the country just kind of one color. That's the model just kind of being more diffuse in time. So I'm not too worried about that just yet. Precipitation wise, same model, same time frame. It's how it initialized for April. So you see it had the driest of the dry, all right, favoring western Kansas, eastern Colorado, northeast New Mexico, and down here into the panhandles. This corridor, it did very, very well with. Maybe extending it a little bit too far west, okay? But it did very well with that corridor there. It did very well with the drought here across the southeast. So in terms of how the model initialized for its April forecast, it didn't do too badly, all right? Not too badly. And keep in mind, we still have to finish April. So some of this stuff back here to the west, especially across north central Kansas, might not look too badly at that time, all right? What about May? May, we just opened things up, all right? All the way through this sector here, from eastern Montana all the way down here through Texas. And I know you say, well, look at that southeast Kansas. Well, in the near term, if there's going to be some rain, okay, southeast Kansas is probably going to be the one that gets it out of everybody, just simply because of the way the pattern is. But the pattern really opens up here in May as the ocean and the atmosphere start to work together. And this is very much on brand historically, as I will show you here in just a second. We do dry out a little bit here in the Midwest, which I think is important because they're going to need a little bit of that. And notice we start to moisten things up here across the southeast, so the dryness there kind of goes away. This isn't just a focus on one area type of thing. There are moving parts all over the place that we have to focus on. June really gets wet. Even if some of this area was in light green, I would be like, okay, well, it's not crazy. There's a lot of blue on the map here from central and east central Texas, Oklahoma, south central Kansas, southwest Missouri, all the way back here to eastern Colorado. As I will show you again, historically, this is very much on brand for this to take place. Now, if we go to July, notice who starts to dry out here. This area in East Texas, southeast Oklahoma, down along the Gulf Coast. Some of that may start to nose up here into parts of eastern Kansas, but the western 2/3 still doing okay. August, we start to dry out a little bit here, all right? But as I said, that's kind of typical. During an El Nino of this type of strength, by the time we get to August, I would be a little bit more concerned about some warmth and some dryness here in this area. But the farther west and northwest you go, it still looks to stay fairly wet. September, we have some dryness that pokes into the western part of the region, but we have wetness that pokes farther east. Here, this would be more akin to some of the seasonal change stuff that we have going on too. And then October, we just blast over again with wetter than average. So in terms of the drought, just looking at the trend here with this model, in terms of the drought for the western 2/3 of the state, it would be easy to surmise that the worst is behind us if you're just looking at this model. Farther east, it may be easy to surmise that say, yeah, we might get some more rain coming on, but we might have to worry about some flash drought by the time we head toward late July and August. Coupled with a little, some heat that's in there too. That's just this one model. Here's another model. This is the Copernicus 3. We're going to look at the same stuff. Temperature, May through September, a little shorter window here. But I want you to notice the trend in May. Anywhere you're seeing the yellow, I don't want you to think of that as heat. I want you to think of that as maybe average to, in some spots, maybe a little cooler than average. The main heat signal is out here to the west for May. All right. June, a little bit more warmth builds in, but I'm more looking at these darker oranges, not these first two color schemes here. All right. More of these darker oranges. That's where I think the better heat is going to show up. July, same story. A little bit more heat farther west out here across the Intermountain West, but no gigantic heat signal here across the middle part of the country. August, not a whole lot different. Better heat signal farther west and farther south. And September, same story. Not a lot of heat here in the middle part of the country. What about precipitation? Is there any dry signal to go along with that? And in one word, no, there's not. This is May. Notice what the model is doing here for May. We are bringing a lot of rain here into parts of New Mexico, Texas, and the adjacent high plains. That is a significant wet signal from these models, with the main dry signal being positioned up here in the Northwest. I often say, I don't a lot of times look for where the green is. I just look for where the brown is not. And I don't see any significant dry signal here in the middle part of the country for May. For June, in fact, June, you could argue for some wet signal going through here, through the middle part of the country, as well as the Southwest. July, dry signal starts to poke up in the areas that I talked about. East Texas, Gulf Coast, maybe up into southern Oklahoma. Wetter out west like this. August, plenty of wetness out here. Some of that dryness sneaks a little farther north. Not out of the question for that, but nothing gigantic here in the middle part of the country. Most of that dry signal is just the first color scheme down here, and it's not terribly widespread. And September, wet across the west. All right. No dry signal there either. The other point of note here that I will say, if you look at all of this green down here off the Baja and off Mexico, traditionally, when we have an El Nino of this strength, like what we're going to have going forward, the Atlantic and the Caribbean hurricane season shuts down. And the Eastern Pacific hurricane season really ramps up. I anticipate a very active Eastern Pacific hurricane season, which a lot of times some of that moisture can get caught and blown up to the northeast as storm systems come in here. So we may not have to, necessarily rely on just one source of moisture coming from the Gulf to really benefit us at some point. We may have some stuff coming at us from the Baja and off the west coast of Mexico and moving up this into our part of the world. The Climate Prediction Center got a lot of run this past week for its precipitation anomaly forecast. So we're going to look at it from May through October in 3-month increments. All right, let's look at May, June, July, first of all. Its May, June, July forecast has wetter here, drier farther northwest, and generally average here in the middle part of the country. All right, that's May, June, July. And I'm scratching my head thinking, okay, I get what it's doing right here. But is this all just because of May? Because we got to have some June and July built in here too. Because when I flip the map to June, July, August, you get that. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because we still have June built in here, all right? But notice the dry tongue that it has coming up from the south here. Very, very expansive. And we have the monsoon going here. So is it just May that's wet and then June and July are dry? Because I can go back to the May, June, July one. This just doesn't make a whole lot of linear sense to me to go from May, June, July like that to, oh boy, June, July, August looks like that. That would mean to me that May would have to be so overwhelmingly wet that it would offset a dry June, July. And I'm just not firmly on board with that just yet because they had the same type of deal last month too. And I think the thing that might be happening is that it's just based off persistence in what's going on, that this pattern is not going to change. And in many cases, the Climate Prediction Center has been touting the fact that El Nino's impacts would occur late summer and into fall. And I'm here to tell you right now, the atmosphere is already responding to El Nino, like I showed you with that southern oscillation drop, the warming, so on and so forth. And it goes to what I was saying, that I was most concerned about the trend, the rate of change here from what I saw in March through June that would help to facilitate that pattern change. And if we go to July, August, September, it's got the same thing right there through the middle. Big bullseye here over South Central and Southeast Kansas. Meanwhile, out west, we're doing business with the monsoon. Very, very dry next to very, very wet. Now, we saw something similar like this in 2023, all right, where the western half of Kansas was wet and had hail and so on and so forth. And the farther east you get, especially east and southeast Kansas, you were drier. I think that if they're trying to do something like that, they need to kind of ratchet things back here to the east a little bit, because I'm on board with July and August, all right, having some issues in that sector. But I think it might be a little bit too far west, is what I'm saying. So I'm not saying that it's completely wrong in my opinion. I'm thinking it just needs to be adjusted a little bit, because even in August, September, October, you see it lingering here. And based on the seasonal change, based on some moisture coming up from the southwest, I think this might be a little bit too aggressive right here. That's just my opinion. But I know those maps got a lot of run. I know people were jumping off a cliff about it, because of what they were seeing. And all I'm saying is that, we need to watch it going forward. I'm not sold on it doing that throughout the duration of the summer in as big of an area that they are suggesting either. And if we go to, looking at the analogs here, okay, before we do that, I want to just keep in mind here, one analog isn't going to do it, all right? We need a few years built into this package because it gives you a better sample set, all right? Every ENSO event, El Nino in this case, is different with different nuances. And I've said this for a long time. I've told people this for a long time that have been pining for an El Nino. Be careful what you wish for, because not every El Nino is the same. We can kind of put together some years that look similar to give us an idea, but we have to be mindful of the fact that as meteorologists and climatologists, we're not great at seasonal forecasting. We're just not. And I'm being very transparent with you here. What we need to do is look at the trends that are before us, use the best forensic evidence that we have before us to make the best projection going forward. And last year at this time, it was looking pretty dire in terms of dryness and drought potential. But the oceans looked worse last year than they even do this year, and we skated through things okay. So I think we have to be mindful about that going forward and very self-aware that we have to, this is not something you consume today and then put on the shelf for 3 months and say, well, what happened? I look at this every single day, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I want us to be measured about this as we go forward. So let's look at some analogs here, and they really haven't changed a whole lot from what I've been showing you. From April through September. I know we're still looking at April because I want to see how we initialize. But I'm going to put 2 years in this these first slides and then remove them and see if that pattern changes. So April, 57, 65, 72, 82, 97, 15, and 23. All of those years, we went from a La Nina to an El Nino, with the exception of 2015. We didn't have a La Nina to come out of, okay? But all these years we did that. And you can see some of the dry signal that was lingering here across parts of the region while we got wetter down here across Texas and certainly through that corridor. All right. Now, what if we remove 57 and 65? That dry signal expands a little bit. Now, obviously, we have wetter here, which that isn't going to be the case, but we were wettest here during the month of April and drier back here through the west. Again, these are not perfect, all right? But the one thing that really showed up in May was this. Look at how wet things got through that corridor. And we started to dry things out a little bit back here. This looks a lot like what the European model was showing, okay? That moisture expanded out of Texas up through the western high plains, all the way up into parts of the Dakotas. Now, if we remove 57 and 65, you get the same signature here, okay? You get the same signature. So those 2 years weren't really weighting the forecast in one way or another. We got that. What about June? June was very wet for the western 2/3 of Kansas. In all of these years, we were drier up here across parts of the upper Midwest. But look at what happened here. We started to dry out here. East Texas, Southeast Texas, we started to dry out as the better moisture pushed farther west and northwest. What if we remove 57 and 65? You still get that window, but notice some dryness starts to show up here. Eastern Kansas, Oklahoma, we're drying out here as well across parts of Texas. So the bias shows up where we are wetter now and still probably going to be wetter in May in eastern Kansas. That wetter signal shifts westward as we go through in time, and the drier signal starts to show up farther east. July was a little bit checkered, but notice how we dried things out here, where we're supposed to. During an El Nino, we still have some wetter stuff here in south central and southwest Kansas, but notice we were drier up here. So as I said, it was kind of checkerboarded here a little bit for July, but if we remove 57 and 65, you still have some of that same checkerboard. You see the extremes that are going on here? Not just from month to month, but just over such a short distance. Look at these climate districts here in southwest Nebraska versus these climate districts here in southwest Kansas and down in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Over that short a distance, we had a huge change. Drier here, wetter south, and even just north of those climate districts, it went right back to wetter. So there will be some extremes built in here, not just from month to month, but over short distances. That's what El Nino does. August, drier, wetter west, as the models were showing you, and a pretty stout dry signal down here. We've got some of that dryness sprinkled in as well here across Kansas. All right. Remove 57, 65. Some of that dryness decreases, but the signal, you can still kind of paint it in right there. September, we turned off wetter again. In all of these years, we still stayed somewhat drier down here across Texas in September. A lot of wet weather out here, likely because of some hurricane moisture that made its way up from the southwest. But if we remove 57 and 65, you could see we were a little bit drier there. So I think the tendency would still favor areas farther west being wetter as we get deeper into summer, with areas farther east, possibly drying out, just like the modeling was showing. Okay. I know that's a lot of information, and I know that there are some things that we've got to sort through, but a couple of things that are important to me is that historically speaking, whenever we've been this dry, and we have a developing and likely strong El Nino coming on very quickly, we have a very big whiplash that takes place where we go from exactly one pattern to the exact other in a pretty short period of time. Now, for some areas, that pattern is going to start doing that, in my opinion, in May, and probably maxing out during June. And then we're going to start to see the pattern shift a little bit where we could dry out farther east and keep things fairly moist farther west. And you look at some of these years in particular, 1982, 1997, 2015, those years were big, severe weather years in the middle part of the country and the western high plains, in terms of hail, flash flooding, tornadoes in there. And 2023 did the same thing. It just mainly favored the western half of the state. All right, we had hail all the way in, we had massive hail all the way into September in 2023 for western Kansas. Ruined a lot of crops, a lot of hail claims, so on and so forth. So I think as we search and kind of come off of that first slide that I showed you, all right, consumer, beware of persistence bias. Creator, beware of confirmation bias. That reality is going to be right in the middle with this, all right, as we move through this. But with every bit of evidence that I have before me, as far as pattern change is concerned, I have a hard time believing that this is exactly the pattern that we are going to remain in as we progress through spring and as we head into summertime.
Awesome. Excellent, Brian. Appreciate everything. Just looking through a few questions here, and I think you touched on most of everything that was sent in, but just kind of recap in the up front here, we do have some chances of rain coming maybe first part of next week, with moisture chances increasing in May, correct?
Yes, and that's kind of what it looks like. And I didn't throw a lot of this other stuff on there because I know I had a lot on here anyway. But one of the main things that I look for when we transition out of a La Nina, and we've left La Nina in the dust toward this strong El Nino, is we have a very strong southern branch or subtropical part of the jet stream that gets invigorated. And that traditionally is what jumpstarts our active weather from Texas, Oklahoma, up into Kansas. Sometimes Nebraska is a little bit too far north to benefit from that, even though I think over the next couple of weeks, Nebraska is probably going to be the biggest benefactor of this pattern change, at least in its initial stages. But there's a lot of modeling that is showing that this subtropical jet stream is going to remain quite strong through the remainder of spring and even into early summer. And a lot of times with that enhanced jet stream energy moving overhead, that's what helps to not only change the weather pattern to make it wetter, but also because of that energy aloft, that's what really brings about an increase as far as severe thunderstorm activity is concerned. You need that energy moving through the mid levels of the atmosphere to create spin for these storms to produce the big hail, the tornadoes, and so on and so forth. So that's why I really want to caution folks that don't be surprised if we go from this pattern that we've been locked into to something that is completely different based on the evidence that I've shown you and based on history. And I'm very self-aware about this. Could this be completely wrong? Sure, I suppose it could. As I always say, the future's hard. I'm just hard pressed, other than just the dry soil that we have right now, and that is a factor, okay? Other than the dry soil, I'm hard pressed to find evidence in this pattern change that would keep it as dry as it's been.
Excellent, excellent. And then just kind of circling back around on the temperature side of things, it's been a pretty hot, warm spring here. But moving forward, it looks like we likely could catch some breaks there as far as like heat through May and through summer.
Yes, I don't see May right now as being a warm month, region wide, especially the farther east you go, across the eastern half of Kansas and on up into the Midwest. Temperatures right now are not looking warmer than average at all. So it kind of goes to what I was saying. As warm as we've been, don't be surprised if May ends up being, quite a bit cooler than what we've been. That's especially true if we go to shoving a bunch of water in the ground, because then that wetter ground won't heat up as much, and you start to reverse the cycle that we've been dealing with, since fall.
Okay, yeah. And then moving into, the end of June, July, corn pollinating season, temperature wise, not really seeing much extreme heat there as far as what the models are reading now.
I just don't. Not at this time. Now, if if the soil starts to dry out there in east and southeast Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, down in East Texas, if there's going to be a significant heat signal that pops up, I would say that that's probably the area that I would watch. But areas farther west, it just isn't showing up in the modeling. And keep in mind, and this is the most important thing that I'm thinking of in terms of temperature, these models a lot of times overestimate what the heat is going to be. All right. So it takes nothing for them to put down the lowest shade of yellow to indicate warmer than average. All right. If these models are not painting a big heat signal, that to me indicates that the chances of that happening are not high at all. And traditionally speaking, El Nino summers, all right, in most of Kansas and in the Midwest, are not hot summers. They're not. They're, in fact, in many cases, they end up being cooler than average. So I don't see a huge heat signal unless it's that, like I mentioned, regionally. If I'm looking at one that I would be a little bit more concerned about, it would be from southeast Kansas down through the eastern half of Oklahoma, East Texas, and the Gulf Coast.
Yep. Okay. And not really trying to throw out a trap question here, but just kind of recap and with your experience and your knowledge, main takeaways here for planting in the month of May, cycles of wet and dry, and then late summer heat maybe for soybeans. what is your gut feeling there for row crop farmers here in kind of the central Kansas, maybe eastern Kansas area?
Do I think that I think that there will be windows of opportunity for them to get some things done. But and I've been telling a lot of folks that have been asking me to like, oh, I'm gonna plant, when am I gonna plant? And I'm like, you know what? If you don't have to, all right, if you don't have a have to, I will wait as long as possible. So all the evidence that I can take in is before me before I have to make that decision. So there's not a huge reason with the soil being as dry as it is. Is there any reason to shove something in the ground just yet? Probably not. However, when it starts raining, when you get a window, you better capitalize on it.
Get her done.
Yeah, I think you better be prepared. Have everything in line when you get that water in that is adequate enough for you to get going and have confidence that you're going to get that seed up and it's going to take off. Do so. And the other part of this is, like I said, don't look at this today and then just put it on the shelf. Okay, this is something that's going to evolve. This pattern has the ability, and history has shown us time and time again, it has the ability to snap very quickly and very harshly when it does. So I would make sure you have everything ready to go to get done what you need to get done. Regarding the later season heat, as I said, that east and southeast part, I would be most concerned about for that. So, in terms of planning, how you do, there was a lot of, there was a lot of corn here in recent years that you could drive around the Western High Plains and the western half of Kansas, and you could pick out which field was planted before the other one. It was pretty easy. So the tendency for a lot of guys lately has been to plant later, okay? Wait for that better moisture signal to come in, plant later instead of planting early, having it burn up, and then getting the moisture on it too late and really cutting those yields. And do I think that this is a year that is different from that thinking? No, I don't. In fact, there may be a lot more folks in the late planting camp because of the lack of moisture right now, which I don't think is a bad thing at this point.
Yeah. So, and then just kind of close it off. We were a little bit down on wheat acres this year, which I think soybeans have been picking up a lot of those acres. August is critical in Kansas for soybean production. Best estimation based off what you're seeing today, average moisture, average heat, or one way or the other?
I think bigger heat signal farther east and southeast. Farther west, I don't see a lot right now that would scare me as far as moisture. Now, and I know that's hard to say because the last few Augusts have been brutal on us with heat and so on and so forth. But if we shove a lot of water in the ground between now and then, that ground is not going to heat up as much. And as I've said, a lot of times with El Nino, this type of El Nino and what it does we don't have a huge heat signal in the middle part of the country. So will there be some August heat? Yeah, probably. Okay. Is it going to be excessive and maybe as bad as we've seen in recent August? Right now, I don't have a signal before me that would suggest that that's going to be the case.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all the kind of the questions and stuff that we had sent in. Brian, again, thank you very much for your time. And we will get the recording of this posted to the YouTube channel, and we'll see everyone next time.
Great. Thanks. Take care, guys. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.